The sun hovered above the Nevada desert like a silent overseer. Heat rippled off the asphalt as a dust-covered rental car pulled into the visitor's lot of Falcon Range Air Command. From the driver's seat stepped a woman who looked more like a grad student than someone authorized to enter the most secure simulation site in the Western Hemisphere. She wore an old denim jacket over a plain white tee, sneakers that had seen better days, and carried a faded laptop bag that had clearly traveled far. Around her neck hung a visitor badge, the only detail linking her to the military machine that buzzed just beyond the gates. As she stepped out and looked toward the runway, her eyes settled on the fighter jets lining up for launch, their sleek forms gleaming like metal predators. Everything about the place screamed hierarchy, precision, tradition, and everything about her whispered quiet defiance. No one gave her a second glance as she passed through the checkpoint, but that wouldn't last long. In less than a day, she would change the rules, shatter expectations, and force the most hardened skeptics to look again, not at her clothes, not at her credentials, but at what she could do with just a screen, a code base, and a stubborn sense of belief. Clare Dawson never cared much for appearances. She was the kind of person who would wear the same jeans 3 days in a row if they were clean enough, the kind who chose comfort over image without a second thought. Her closet held more hoodies than heels, and her idea of dressing up was swapping sneakers for boots that didn't squeak. What Clare did care about was clarity. In a world that often rewarded noise, she thrived in silence, numbers, models, systems that could make sense of chaos. Those were her languages. She'd grown up in Illinois, the daughter of a high school math teacher and a part-time librarian. Books and equations filled her childhood more than playdates or parties ever did. From the start, Clare was drawn to patterns, to the elegant predictability that math offered in contrast to life's messiness. By 16, she'd built her first simulation engine on a second-hand laptop. It ran clunky, but it worked. She used it to model weather patterns for her local science fair and won a state scholarship that helped get her to MIT. At MIT, Clare stood out quietly. She wasn't loud in lectures or flashy with her achievements. But when a professor needed a proof checked or a team needed help debugging a neural network, Clare was the one they called. She didn't push for recognition. She just wanted the work to be good. She graduated near the top of her class and turned down offers from the usual giants, Silicon Valley firms that promised perks and stock options. Instead, she chose to co-found a small defense-focused startup with 3 other researchers who, like her, believed in purpose over profit. Their goal was simple build smarter tools that could prevent loss of life on the battlefield, not by creating more weapons, but by giving existing systems the intelligence to avoid mistakes. The kind that cost lives, that didn't make headlines but haunted families. They called the system Phantom Lock. It was part radar supplement, part predictive algorithm, designed to find where enemy aircraft would hide. Not just where they had been. Clare's job was to make the code see through chaos, to predict behavior based on history, momentum, and probability. For 3 years, she worked out of a shared office near Arlington. She lived modestly, biked to work, and ate microwaved rice most days. She spent hours refining her models, running endless scenarios, and sleeping under her desk more often than at home. The breakthrough came after a failed military test. Their original pitch was rejected as too abstract, too academic. But Clare didn't give up. She rebuilt the architecture from scratch, simplified the interface, and made it leaner, faster, more practical. That tenacity paid off when a junior official at Langley noticed the revised demo and flagged it for a classified trial. The trial showed promise, and soon, a minor contract followed. Nothing major, but enough to get her invited to Falcon Edge. For Clare, that invite was everything. Not because it would make her famous, but because it was a chance to prove, in real-world terms, that her work mattered. Still, when she packed for the trip, she didn't bring business cards or power suits, just her old laptop, some notebooks, a few snacks, and the faded denim jacket she wore when she wanted to feel grounded. She knew she'd be the outsider. She'd been that all her life. But she also knew something else. In every system, no matter how rigid or ancient, there were cracks, places where logic could slip in. And if she could find just one of those cracks, Phantom Lock would speak for her. Claire didn't come to be liked. She came to be useful, and that made her far more dangerous than anyone at the base could imagine. The base looked like something out of a military documentary. Concrete stretched for miles, broken only by steel hangars, rows of Humvees, and the sharp silhouettes of fighter jets baking under the Nevada sun. Every movement was crisp, timed, and exact, like a machine running with zero room for friction. Claire stepped out of her rental car and slung her laptop bag over her shoulder. She felt eyes on her almost immediately. Not hostile, but curious in that way people look at something that doesn't belong. A woman in civilian clothes, walking alone, carrying no tools, no gear, just a battered bag and a quiet face. The guard barely glanced at her badge before pointing across the tarmac. Tech support in Hangar 7. Just follow the yellow line. His tone was flat, dismissive, the kind of voice used for someone delivering snacks, not someone supporting critical defense systems. Claire didn't argue. She nodded, thanked him, and kept walking. The yellow line wound past busy corridors filled with noise and authority. Pilots strode past her in olive suits, boots echoing on the pavement. They spoke in clipped sentences full of acronyms, barely looking her way. More than once. Conversations paused as she passed, only to resume in a lower tone once she'd moved on. She wasn't trying to listen, but she knew the rhythm. She'd heard it before, at MIT, at Langley. That almost silent calculation of how far someone like her could possibly matter. Hangar 7 wasn't marked, just a set of double doors with peeling paint and a dull clang when they shut behind her. Inside, it was all cables, metal dividers, and the low hum of server fans, a world of hardware and hierarchy. She spotted the main command center at the far end. Glass walls, glowing screens, officers in tailored uniforms bent over glowing maps. She stepped forward but barely made it 3 feet before a colonel blocked her path. Buzz cut. Square shoulders. Heavy voice shaped by decades of shouting into engines. He didn't need to say much. One look told her what he thought. Not a threat. Not a peer. Just another academic trying to play soldier. She introduced herself. Calm and clear. Offered her role. Mentioned the contract. He cut her off before she could finish. Tech support belongs in the auxiliary bay. No exceptions. Around them, the room had stilled. The kind of still that carries smirks and shared glances. A pilot in the corner leaned back and joked about putting her by the fuel lines. The laughter was soft but sharp. Claire felt her face warm but didn't let it show. She said she understood and turned to follow a young sergeant who had been watching in awkward silence. No drama, no confrontation, just one more closed door in a long list of them. As they walked toward the auxiliary section, past crates and spare parts, Claire kept her focus ahead. This wasn't new. This wasn't unexpected. And like every other time, she wasn't here to prove her worth to men like that. She was here to do her job. And that she could do from anywhere. Claire found a space in the corner of the auxiliary bay, behind a wall of metal shelving and boxes labeled with codes she didn't recognize. The air smelled like oil and hot wires. Her table was a piece of plywood balanced across 2 crates, wobbly on one side but enough to hold her laptop. She sat down and pulled the screen open, the soft glow casting light across her face. Around her, people moved with purpose but without concern for her presence. She could have been invisible. And that was fine with her. Claire had learned to do her best work in the spaces no one else wanted. She plugged in, opened her terminal, and began pulling telemetry from the backup data feeds. The stream was slower than the primary systems. It was messier, full of noise, but not useless. Patterns still lived in the clutter. They just took longer to find. She let her fingers move without thinking. the commands flowing from habit. Behind her, someone dropped a wrench, and laughter echoed from across the room. She didn't flinch. Phantom Lock was already running diagnostics in the background. It sifted through the auxiliary radar output, looking for gaps and flickers, the moments when enemy aircraft would slip through conventional scans unnoticed. This was what Claire had built it for. Not perfect data, not ideal conditions, just possibility and fragments. She glanced toward the glass wall of the command center. The officers inside pointed at maps and murmured into headsets. She wasn't part of that room. Not yet. But she didn't need to be. She wasn't here to win their attention. She was here to catch what they missed. Every line of code she wrote was a quiet rebellion. Every calculated prediction was her voice in a space that didn't want to hear it. She didn't speak loudly, but she didn't need to. She had 25 minutes until the simulation began. 25 minutes to take data no one cared about and turn it into something that might matter. She cracked open an energy bar and took a small bite, her eyes never leaving the screen. This wasn't the first time she'd been boxed into a corner, but it was the first time the corner had a view of real fighter jets preparing to launch. She didn't know what would happen today, but she knew one thing for sure. They weren't watching her now, but they would be. The simulation began at exactly 0900. On the giant screens inside the command center, F-16s marked in blue raced across digital airspace. Red triangles, the French Rafales, moved with equal speed, threading the sky with practiced precision. Claire watched from her corner, her laptop displaying a different kind of map. Phantom Lock was already picking up behavior patterns, small shifts in trajectory that followed a mathematical rhythm. It wasn't enough for most systems to detect anything, but she saw it. The Rafales were executing a maneuver known as notching, slipping into radar shadows at just the right angle to vanish from American scopes. On her screen, they glowed like embers under the surface, visible only through the algorithm's predictive modeling. She typed quickly, opening a back-channel message window linked to the secondary network. Her fingers paused just long enough to double-check the coordinates. Then she sent the message. Falcon 1. Recommend vector 270. Altitude $15,000. Predicting Rafale pattern. No response came. She checked the connection. Still live. Delivered. But inside the command center, the blue jets held course, unaware of what was coming. Claire's jaw tightened. She watched the red triangles scatter again, diving into radar gaps just as the Americans committed to their attack. On the big screen, targets vanished. Scopes went dark. Confused voices rose behind the glass. Pilots called out negative contacts. The room buzzed with disbelief. Someone had pulled the plug on visibility, and no one knew how. Except her. On her screen, Phantom Lock tracked each Rafale in silence, building a ghost trail through electronic fog. It projected their movement into the future, outlining their likely path down to a margin of 50 meters. Her phone buzzed. It was a direct message from Falcon 2 Lieutenant Jake Daniels. Short. Source. She hesitated. Revealing herself meant risk. If it failed, she'd be dismissed in seconds. But if she stayed silent, they'd fly blind. She answered, Phantom Lock, predictive AI. Trust it. One beat, then another. Copy that. Adjusting heading. Claire leaned in, eyes fixed on her screen. His plane shifted slightly on the grid, pulling away from formation. Alone now, but on the path she predicted. The seconds ticked down. Daniel's voice crackled through the room. Fox 3. On the main display, one of the red triangles blinked, flickered, and disappeared. A clean hit. Simulated, but perfect. The silence that followed was immediate and total. Technicians stared. Officers leaned toward the screens. One kill, out of nowhere. Inside the command center, a captain muttered something about a lucky shot. A few chuckled. It didn't feel like luck. Claire didn't smile. She didn't move. She just logged the hit and marked the data. For now, it was enough that she knew. Phantom Lock had spoken, and someone had listened. Inside the command center, the mood shifted quickly. Officers leaned back in their chairs, some shaking their heads with amused disbelief. One of them joked that even a broken clock gets lucky twice a day. The room laughed, not loudly, but loud enough for the message to land. Claire heard it from behind the server racks, every word sliding under her skin. She kept her eyes on her laptop. Phantom Lock was still running, still tracking, still working without anyone's permission. It didn't care about politics or pecking orders. A younger tech, trying to be polite, walked by and said good job in a way that sounded like he didn't believe it himself. Claire just nodded. She wasn't interested in empty praise or backhanded compliments. Her screen blinked. A message appeared in the corner. From Falcon 2. That wasn't luck. I saw it. You were right. She stared at the words for a second, then read them again. Just 4 short lines. But they cut through the noise better than anything else that day. He hadn't said it over the radio, hadn't tried to grandstand or show off. He'd just told her the truth. Quietly. Directly. The way she liked things. Claire replied with a simple thanks. Nothing more. No victory dance. No explanation. Just mutual understanding between 2 people who knew what they saw. The rest of the base could write it off. Say it was coincidence or chance or even a glitch in the simulation. But one pilot knew better. And now, so did she. That belief didn't fix everything. It didn't unlock access to the command center or erase the smirks that followed her down the hallway. But it was enough to keep going. In the corner of a hangar filled with doubt, Claire had found one thread of trust. That was more than she'd started with. And it was exactly what she needed. The knock came just after noon. A woman in uniform stepped into Claire's corner of the hangar, her expression sharp and unreadable. She introduced herself as Major Garrett and wasted no time. She said the brass had reviewed Claire's logs. The success of the previous engagement raised questions, and they needed to validate her data, effective immediately. She was required to transfer all cached radar files and algorithm logs to the base server. Claire sat still for a beat, trying to stay calm. The request sounded official, almost routine, but she knew what it really meant. They weren't asking for a report. They were demanding the very thing that made her project unique, the core of Phantom Lock, the engine behind everything. She asked if she could redact proprietary code. The answer came back flat. No time for that. Full transfer. Now. Claire felt her breath catch. If she gave them the algorithm raw, they could take it, break it down, repackage it without her. Her company, her team, 3 years of work, gone in an instant. She tried to explain, said it was protected under contract. The Major's face didn't change. This was a classified operation. All data belonged to the Department of Defense. The trap was complete. If she refused, she'd be escorted out and marked as non-compliant. If she agreed, she'd hand over her life's work. Her hands felt cold. Her thoughts spun. There was no right move, just the illusion of choice wrapped in layers of protocol. She looked around, searching for someone who might speak up. No one met her eyes. Even the young tech who had believed in her was buried in his terminal. Claire nodded slowly, said she needed a few minutes to organize the files. Garrett gave her 5, then turned and left without another word. She sat there, staring at her screen. Every folder felt heavier than code should. They had cornered her with rules she couldn't bend. She closed her eyes for a moment, willing her thoughts to slow. There had to be another way. She just needed to find it before the clock ran out. Claire stared at the folders on her screen and felt the weight of every decision she had ever made. The core engine of Phantom Lock wasn't just lines of code. It was years of sleepless nights, missed holidays, and risks no one else had wanted to take. She clicked open a new shell and began building a duplicate. It would look like the real package. The file names would match. The data would check out. But the intelligence behind it, the true engine that predicted flight paths and behavior, would be stripped out. What she left behind was structure without spirit, a body without its brain, enough to satisfy the demand, but useless in the hands of anyone who didn't know the difference. Her fingers moved quickly. She embedded harmless decoys, false dependencies, and removed the adaptive logic. She made sure it would pass any basic inspection. They'd see what they expected to see. Every move felt like walking a tightrope. If they looked too closely, she was done. If they didn't, she might just buy herself time. When Major Garrett returned, Claire handed over the thumb drive. Her expression was calm. Inside, her heartbeat was counting every second. The Major took it without comment and left as quickly as she had arrived. Claire leaned back in her chair, her shoulders tight. She had played her card. Now she had to wait. Hours passed with no word, no confrontation, no alarm. Somewhere in the base servers, the dummy file sat undisturbed. Claire knew this wasn't over. At best, she had delayed the inevitable. Sooner or later, someone would notice the absence of results. But she had protected what mattered. Phantom Lock still lived, still learned, still belonged to the team that built it. For now, that was enough. She opened a new window and went back to work. There were more simulations coming, more opportunities to prove her value in ways they couldn't ignore. Let them underestimate her. Let them smile behind closed doors. They thought they had her boxed in. But Clare Dawson didn't need a spotlight. She needed only space to move. And when that came, she'd be ready. The next day, Claire logged in and noticed something was off. Her radar feed was behind. Not by much, but enough to matter. A full 30-second delay, confirmed by the timestamps. She didn't need a memo to understand what had happened. Someone in command had throttled her access, probably under the guise of security protocol. The message was clear. She wasn't welcome. And they were done playing nice. 30 seconds was a lifetime in air combat. By the time she saw the enemy's position, it was already obsolete. Her predictions would fall apart. Her tool would look broken. She sat still for a moment, breathing slow. Panic wouldn't help. Complaining wouldn't change anything. So she opened her codebase and started over. Phantom Lock hadn't been designed to work blind, but it had been trained on chaos, on missing data, on gaps no one else could read. Claire realized she didn't need live updates. She needed to see ahead. She began to rewire the system, teaching it to think forward instead of now. She built an extension that modeled velocity, angle, and acceleration to predict where the targets would be, not where they had been. It was like teaching a compass to see the road, not just the direction. Every line of code pushed the algorithm further from reactive to anticipatory. Around her, no one paid attention. The officers thought they had clipped her wings, but she was climbing in a different way. By noon, the rewrite was functional. She ran simulations and saw the paths tighten. The delay was still there, but the predictions caught up. Phantom Lock had evolved. She sent a silent ping to the simulation room. Her model was back online. No need to announce it. No need to explain. As jets took off for the second drill, she leaned in. The red targets danced across the screen, 30 seconds behind, but already accounted for. The system tracked them, not by following, but by leading. Like chess pieces 2 moves ahead. She ran the data twice to be sure, then once more, just to prove it to herself. When the first missile locked, Claire wasn't surprised. When it landed on target, she didn't flinch. She just logged the event and waited. They had tried to set her up to fail, but all they had done was help her see farther. She sat back, the screen glowing in her glasses. In their effort to stop her, they had given her what she needed most, a reason to adapt, a reason to grow stronger. Sabotage was meant to break her, but all it did was sharpen her edge. The moment the exercise went live, Claire opened her back channel. Her radar data was delayed, but Phantom Lock had already filled in the blanks. The paths were predicted, aligned, and pushed forward like a map only she could see. She didn't hesitate. She pinged Falcon 2 directly, sending 3 coordinates with a short note. Estimated enemy intercept in 30 seconds. Altitude locked. Suggested angle of approach. The pilot didn't reply. Not right away. But she saw his jet shift on the simulation map, pulling away from the rest of the formation. Inside the command center, no one had caught on. Yet. The screen still displayed standard movement. The officers continued issuing orders, but one plane had gone rogue. Seconds ticked by. Claire sat frozen, watching her window. Then the call came in over the radio. Visual contact. Firing. A second later, one of the enemy aircraft vanished from the board. Hit confirmed. The command center fell silent. Confusion followed. The pilot had acted without direct orders. The kill had come from a trajectory no one expected. A few officers muttered about insubordination. But someone noticed the path, traced it, realized it matched no pattern they had run. They asked where it came from. No one could answer. Then the pilot spoke again, said the vector came from a civilian analyst, said it was worth trusting, said it worked. Claire heard her name echo down the hallway, not shouted, but spoken with weight. Someone pulled her data logs. Someone else called for a review. In minutes, the entire simulation room shifted. What had been background noise was now the center of every question. How did she see it coming? How accurate was her model? Who approved her access? One colonel demanded she be suspended. Another said they needed to see more of her work. The chain of command split, torn between caution and curiosity. Claire didn't move. She kept her focus on the stream. More predictions loaded, more chances to prove this wasn't a fluke. For the first time, no one laughed when she sent coordinates. No one joked when she adjusted the model. She wasn't invisible anymore. She had broken the chain without breaking a rule. And now the room was listening. Not because she demanded it, but because she earned it. Through quiet code and one trusted pilot, Claire had shifted the room. She hadn't won the war, but the tide had turned. 6 months later, the hangar that once held boxes and shadows now buzzed with controlled energy. The desks had been replaced with modular command stations. At the far end, under the glow of soft LED strips, Clare Dawson sat at the head of a new joint operations hub. She wore the same denim jacket, the same well-worn sneakers, but her badge now read Program Director, Phantom Systems Division. The title didn't change her. She still brought her own coffee in a stainless mug, still worked late with her headphones on, blocking out the noise, but the people around her had changed. Many of the officers who once ignored her now ran her protocols. The same engineers who doubted her code now quoted it in briefings. One of the pilots had joined her team full-time, teaching others how to fly with AI support, not in spite of it. Claire didn't gloat. That was never the point. Quiet victory always tasted better than loud approval. Her office was just a glass wall and a long desk, overlooking the test runway. Each morning, she watched the jets lift off, their paths now guided by algorithms she had built from scraps. Not for glory, for safety. Phantom Lock had gone national, adapted and redeployed into 5 different command structures. She still reviewed every update, every tweak, every field report. Precision mattered. She thought sometimes about that first week, about the crude table, the sabotage, the silence, and then about the back-channel message from Falcon 2. That had been the turning point. Respect hadn't arrived with applause. It came in small acts, a nod, a request for input. A silence that used to mock her now held space for her words. Even now, she never raised her voice in meetings, but when she spoke, rooms quieted, decisions paused, people listened. She had learned that power didn't always roar. Sometimes it sat quietly in a corner, gathering strength until it could no longer be ignored. One afternoon, she received a visit from Major Garrett, now promoted. She extended a hand and apologized. Sincerely. Claire shook it and thanked her. No resentment, no lecture, just closure. Leadership had never been Claire's goal, but the role fit her in ways no one expected. She led by building, not commanding, by showing what was possible rather than forcing it. She walked through the hangar each night before locking up, touching the edge of each desk like a quiet ritual. She still wrote code, still tested theories, still believed there was more to do. A new intern once asked how she stayed so calm when everything was against her. Claire smiled and said she never thought of it that way. She just kept walking. She believed in her work more than she feared rejection, believed in what it could save more than who tried to take it. Her story wasn't one of revenge or rebellion. It was one of persistence, of knowing your value even when no one else does. and letting that truth outlive every moment of doubt. In the quiet, with jets overhead and code humming through the walls, Clare Dawson had not just survived. She had changed the shape of what was possible, all without ever raising her voice.